Writers Read by LiTracey. Getting that book in children's hands.
Hi, I'm Tracey Grice and welcome to the Writers Read podcast. I'm a teacher and I'm really passionate about getting kids reading. The inspiration for this podcast came from a quote by American author Nancy Atwell, and she says, "For students of every ability and background, it's the simple, miraculous act of reading a good book that turns them into readers. Because even for the least experienced, most reluctant reader, it's the one good book that changes everything. The job of adults who care about reading is to move heaven and earth to put that book into a child's hands." So this podcast is designed to do just that. It's not only a podcast that can help children and adolescents connect with authors and books, it's also a resource for parents, teachers and librarians who are helping kids on their reading journey. On this episode of the Writers Read podcast, I'm chatting with Melbourne-based author Kesta Fleming. And as always, we'll also hear from our regular recommender Rebecca and our student reviewer Liv. Kesta Fleming is a writer and poet and author of the debut chapter book Marlow Brown, Scientist in the Making, the first in a fiction series for 7 to 10-year-olds. Kesta loves stories and finds words fascinating, so it makes perfect sense that she writes. I was thrilled to meet her and have a dining table chat with her about her life as a reader and the Marlow series. Kesta, welcome to Adelaide and thanks for meeting me today. It's really exciting to see your brand new novel. What was the inspiration that got you going with writing this?
Well, it's my first chapter book. Before chapter books, I have been writing other things, so picture book manuscripts and a lot of poems and rhyme and that sort of thing. And so I wanted to find out a bit more about writing longer stuff for children. And so I was doing a course, a chapter book writing course with Cheryl Clark, and she had set us a task, which was to create a character and write about their last birthday. And so it stemmed from that, and that birthday scene is in the book. But yeah, that was what gave the idea. And when I was writing, because I was writing from Marlow's point of view, for some reason Marlow's voice needed to be. It felt like it needed to be an experiment, and she was writing down, what she discovered, what she was experimenting with at this birthday party, which was she wanted to see whether her dog Rockstar could pass the parcel just as well as human children. And she writes it all up as an experiment, and that was the voice that came through.
Right. And so is Marlow a character that you've been thinking about for a while, or has she been inspired by, something that you've read that kind of sparked an idea?
No. And in fact, I can't honestly remember why or how I came up with Marlow as a character. And I don't know whether this is the same for many other writers, but I know the chapter book has just been published this year, so it's a recent release. But I actually wrote the story about 10 years ago in its original form.
So as part of your course, were you required to sort of do some reading to, think about other genres or ideas or formats for this book?
Absolutely. There was stacks of reading involved. We had to read chapter books galore. So I became very familiar with books for this age group back then. And my children at the time were in primary school, so the librarian was very helpful there. So I come home with stacks of chapter books to read.
So reading children's picture books now as an adult, is that something that, forms part of your reading life, or have you always read children's books?
I have always read children's books, to be honest. I was thinking about this earlier today, and I was surrounded by books growing up, but not just books, stories. So my earliest memories, I don't have many memories of actually having picture books as such, but I have a lot of memories of being read to, and we had no TV. We had no TV until I left home. So, wow. So I guess where children might be in front of the television or sitting in front of a screen, that was never me. If we were sat anywhere, it would be to listen to a story on the reel-to-reel tape recorder player. And we listened to a lot that way, and then my dad used to read to us. So I don't remember picture books, but I do remember going straight into, I guess, chapter books and then beyond. And then the reading, my father used to read to us every mealtime to stop him getting indigestion. So, so I would have, my own books on the go as a reader. But, alongside of that, or sort of in parallel, we'd have other stories going, which might be for a much older audience. Yeah.
So stories and books were obviously a part of your early childhood experience. When you started school, was it the same experience for you there?
No, my older brother went to school reading already, and I was slow with that. So much as my mother tried to teach me to read before I went to school, I was just a bit slow with it. And so I found that whole process at school really frustrating. And I do remember the first book that I could read properly. It was about a butterfly, and I could actually read the whole word butterfly and was so excited and proud of myself. So yeah, I do have those early memories, but it wasn't until I was probably, I don't know, 8 or 9 or 10 perhaps. I was very competitive as a child, and I was competitive in everything. And we had come back from overseas, and we were, I was at a school with only 42 children up in the Adelaide Hills. And so my class was grade 4 to 7. So I was in grade 5 when I came to that school, and partway through the year, I think we must have had a new teacher or perhaps a librarian. I'm not sure. It was such a small school, we didn't really have many teachers at all. But the thing that this teacher set up was this chart outside the classroom, which had all of our names on one side. And every time we'd read a book, we would get a little book sticker, and we would put it next to our name. And I wanted to beat the grade 6s being a grade 5 because I was so competitive. And so even if I hadn't read a lot before, I was absolutely avid. I read everything. It didn't matter what it was. As long as I read the book from start to finish, I could get my sticker up there and, And the thing is, I loved stories anyway. I'd been read to constantly, and that just kind of set me off as a reader, having that little bit of competition. I read so many different books at that point.
So the books meant something to you. It wasn't just about the sticker, it was about the stories.
The stories were fantastic, and I remember lying on my bed when I was in maybe grade 6 or 7 and looking at my bookshelf, which had gradually been increasing over the time, and looking at it and thinking, those are all worlds, and I know all of those worlds, and I can just go and pull a world off that shelf and step into it. And I would read books over and over again to go and experience that world again if I'd loved it that much, which I usually did. Yeah.
And so did you beat the year 7s?
I think I beat the year 6s, but maybe not the year 7s.
And so do you feel like, I guess your identity as a reader was formed quite young, and then, may have, it was sort of ticking along in the background, but do you feel like that's the point where things really took off for you when you were in about grade 5?
Yeah, I think, I was, 9 or 10 at the time. That's when it all took off. Yeah. Before that, it had been a struggle for my own personal reading, but still loved the stories.
Sure.
But then I hit another rough patch, I think, as a reader when I went to high school, because suddenly we were having to read books that I didn't like. And that really put me off.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to read books that were happy and fun or full of fantasy or time travel or whatever it was. I didn't want to read about depressing things, and yeah.
And so did you keep up that love of story and your own personal reading? Was that something that you were able to keep up with the demands of study, or is it something that kind of slid away for a while?
No, I kept it up. In fact, there are 2 things that I did hand in hand from about the age of 11. One of them was to keep a daily diary, and I've kept it ever since. So like a 5-year diary. And in the back of that diary, I keep a list of the books that I've read for the year. So every book I write down. So maybe that's that. It's self-competing. No one sees that list. But yeah, it's that. Maybe that's started in primary school with that list where you write down the books that you'd read. But then I put a little star next to the ones that are fantastic.
Is your stack of books to be read, are you a methodical reader? Do you work your way through it, or I have a stack that's unread and I dip in and flick through, and I have multiple books on the go at any one time. So how does that look for you?
I'm not quite the same as that. So I would tend to read one book at a time, one fiction book at a time. But I might have a non-fiction or 2 on the go because they're not quite so compelling for me. So I'll have, a couple of non-fictions on the go, but the fiction, generally I'm one at a time.
Okay.
I guess in tandem with that, I've had stories read to me, so I suppose you could say that was two at a time. But there's less of that reading to me now.
Yeah,
not many people read to me.
So your life now as an adult, we know that children's fiction is part of your reading life now. What other kinds of things, form part of your reading stack?
Yeah, well, so a mix of children's and young adults, but also it took me quite a long time to find adult books I liked. So I said when I went to high school, I found them thoroughly depressing. Everything we had to read was, I didn't like reading at that point, so reading's an escapism for me, and I didn't want to go to these horrible worlds. It took a few years before I found the sorts of books that I liked as an adult. So the sorts of things that I love, I still love time slip books. So The Time Traveller's Wife was a good one. I also enjoy some historical fiction, so I loved such a long title, the Guernsey and Literary Potato Peel Pie Society. Those sorts of books are the ones that make my socks go up and down, I guess.
And what helped you? So you said it took you a while to kind of find your groove there with the kinds of books you'd like to read. Was there someone or something that helped you with that?
Yes. Probably, we had a friend who was a librarian, and she was great at recommending books. I would say teachers, but I'd say primary teachers more than high school teachers, because the high school teachers wanted me to read these heavy books, which I'm really glad that I read, and I still do read some of those. I don't restrict I don't think because I don't enjoy them I won't read them, but I read less of them. But yes, probably not so much high school teachers, but more librarians and friends. And I belong to a couple of different book clubs, and that's always good. And my writers group, we all enjoy reading as well, so we recommend books to each other.
One thing that most adult readers that I speak to struggle with is finding the time to just read without the distractions of social media or TV or other things, and it's finding moments in your day where you can just steal those moments to escape to a book. Do you have set routines about when you read, like bedtime reading, or a special spot where you sit, or a favourite place?
I don't have a favourite place, but I do. I fall asleep these days. I used to read late into the night growing up, and if I've got a really good book, I just then don't function well the next day because I'll continue to read into the night until it's done. So I don't seem to have a great deal of self-control that way. So the best times for me to read, I carry a book with me most of the time, so that if I'm waiting for children to finish piano lessons, or I'm in any spot where I'm waiting, I'll have the book to read. So I was reading on the plane coming over here, for example, from Melbourne, and
And did you leave off in a cliffhanger moment? Are you carrying that book with you through the to the carousel and everything, or are you...
No. Once I need to start dealing with practicalities around me, then the book has to go away, and that's where it's handy to be reading on the move, because I'm not going to be reading until the early hours because I have to get on with my life.
And so when you were writing your book, did you find you had to obviously read in preparation to write, but does your reading life drop off while you're focusing on getting your book going?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for this first book, which I wrote some years ago, as I said, we did a whole stack of reading in preparation, and then yes, I didn't read much of that genre while I was writing it. This year I've been concentrating on the second one in the series, so the Marlow Brown series they're obviously going to be more than one book. So in writing that second book, I have still read children's fiction, but part of that is because I've just joined a book club this year, which is a children's book club. So it's for people who love children's literature, and we read a picture book, a chapter book, and a young adult a month. So yes, I've had to keep reading in order to contribute to that. But that's been fine because they're completely different from what I was writing, and I knew what I was doing with my writing. I've got the voice in my head. I know who Marlow is, so it didn't affect it.
Sure. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about is helping children to find their next great read. What advice would you give young readers who are looking, maybe they're stuck, or maybe they're avid readers, but they're just, thinking, how do I find my next great book? I've just finished reading Marlow Brown. The next one in the series isn't out yet. Where do I go? What do I do?
I'd say go to the library and speak to the librarian and make friends with the librarian. So make sure the librarian knows you and you know them and you've got some rapport. And if not the librarian, if the librarian doesn't do it for you wherever you happen to be, then maybe talk to your friends. So when I was going through high school, even though I wasn't enjoying the literature that I was having to read for English, I had a friend who loved reading as well, and so we would pass books backwards and forwards to each other. And some of her tastes I didn't like her horror taste, for example, but I discovered that through reading what she gave me. So yeah, I'd say just keep trying, talk to people and share.
So if you could talk to your teenage high school self, would you go back and read those books now that you didn't enjoy in high school, or you've put those to bed?
I think I've put them to bed, but one stuck in my mind, which was A Patch of Blue, which I found at the time, I think I was in year 9. I found it thoroughly depressing. And I was just curious. I was just having a quick look on Goodreads to see what it said about it. I've not thought about the book since. So I'm slightly curious to have a look, and maybe I would feel differently about it. I'd certainly happily give it another go, but if I was finding it depressing, I wouldn't hesitate to put it down.
And what about rereading books that you have enjoyed? Is that something that you do?
I used to do it all the time. Over and over. So one of my favourites growing up was Alice Nutley's A Traveller in Time. I loved that book and I couldn't tell you how many times I read it. These days, I feel like life is too short and there are so many things to read that I don't do it as much, to be honest. But maybe I should.
Yeah. What did rereading bring to you as a reader?
It brings you back to that world that you loved. So that's why I would reread. I loved that world. So I wanted to step back into it and look at it from different angles and see if there was anything I missed. I didn't, at the time, I certainly didn't feel like it was a waste of time. It was just re-immersing myself in something I loved. And why wouldn't you do that if you loved it, if you read for pleasure?
Did it ever disappoint, or did it always just make the fondness for the book grow more?
At the time, like within that time period of growing up, rereading the books was great. But I can't think what the book was. I recently reread a book that I loved and thought, why did I think that was so special? So yeah, that you can come across books like that, I guess.
Yeah. But it seems like books and reading have really been with you, even when times were tough and you sort of had to have a bit of that sort of reading resilience in those early years, that reading really has been a big part of your life, and it looks like it's going to continue to be part of your life as you continue writing the Marlow books and perhaps have you got other projects on the go that you're able to talk about?
Well, I have this stack of picture book manuscripts which I keep going back to and working on and then submitting and sending off to publishers. So I would love to see one of those come to life at some point. But yeah, if not, that's fine. I'm happy following Marlow's story at the moment and finding something new for her to look at in each new book.
Well, we look forward to following her adventures and hopefully seeing one of your picture books come to life. So thank you for your time today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
We've heard Kesta talk about her new Marlow Brown book, so let's hear her read a short passage from it now.
Chapter 1. Uncle Quentin. Marlow and Rockstar stood side by side in Uncle Quentin's living room. Rockstar's tail wagged hard against Marlow's legs. They both loved it here. Uncle Quentin's house was cluttered and untidy, jam-packed with interesting stuff. There were jars of ball bearings, packets of seeds, and pots of curious powders. Corked beakers of oozy liquids lined the mantelpiece, and there were piles of scientific books and empty coffee cups everywhere. Marlow and Rockstar breathed in deeply together. Even the smell was fantastic, like a second-hand bookshop with a distant whiff of chocolate. Marlow ruffled Rockstar's fur and tried to peer past Uncle Q. The conservatory door was slightly ajar. She grinned. "So what's your new experiment then?" She looked up at her uncle. "Take a guess." Uncle Q rubbed his hands together. His eyes crinkled at the corners and he did a little dance. His specs fell off. "It's a good one," he said. Rockstar retrieved Uncle Q's glasses. Drool dripped from one of the arms. Uncle Quentin put them back on absently and gave Rockstar a pat. He didn't even notice the slobber. "Is it a kind of potion?" said Marlow. "Not this time." Uncle Q's long legs jigged gleefully. "Is it a—" Marlow scratched her head. "Woof!" said Rockstar. "Wrong again!" Marlow laughed. "Could try, Rockstar," she said. Marlow thought hard. She could see bits of green poking through the conservatory door. "Plants," she said. "Is it something to do with plants?" "Jackpot!" Uncle Q stepped aside. "Come on through." Marlow followed her uncle into the conservatory. Rockstar dashed between their legs and sent a coffee cup flying. Marlow's eyes opened wide. Beanstalks, like jacks. They were touching the glass roof. They were climbing out the windows. They were enormous. "Wow," breathed Marlow. Uncle Q held his hand aloft. Between his thumb and index finger was a large white tablet. "Gibberellic acid," he announced, "makes things grow big." And that's the end of chapter 1. If you would like to find out more about Marlow Brown and what she does to become a scientist herself, you'll have to get the book.
Students speak.
I gave this book 3 lives. The first live is for creativity. Marlow is a super creative girl who has great ideas and always did her best to come up with a solution to all her problems. The second live is for family. Even though her experiments might not have gone the way she had hoped, her parents eventually saw what science and experiments meant to her. The final live is for friendship. Marlow's best friend is her dog called Rockstar. I thought how amazing it is how animals can be such a big part of our lives, but also how much her dog meant to Marlow.
Hi, I'm Kesta Fleming, and you're listening to the Writers Read podcast.
Rebecca recommends.
The book we have today is Marlow Brown, Scientist in the Making by Kesta Fleming. As the title suggests, this is a science-themed novel. Anything science-related is very popular at the moment, be it non-fiction on specific areas of science, to science experiments or biographies of famous scientists, and even picture books about science and scientists. And here we are today with a novel. Now, as this is a podcast, and you can't see me holding the book, I will take a minute to describe it to you. This is a very accessible novel. It's only 72 pages with illustrations throughout. So this makes it a good choice for readers just building their confidence when it comes to reading novels. I also think that the size would lend itself well to use in the classroom. Perfect for a week's worth of reading with the added bonus that is a handful of experiments to work on at the same time. Each experiment is written up with a hypothesis, equipment required, a method, results, and a conclusion. So from a purely classroom point of view, it lends itself to being a great modelling tool. So now to Marlow. She is science mad. So much so that she drives her family crazy with her constant experiments. The need to conduct these experiments comes from Marlow's never-ending curiosity about the world around her. Many of us would just see a worm and think, oh, a worm. But not Marlow. Marlow sees a worm and she questions whether the length of the worm will make a difference to how fast that worm will wriggle. While Marlow is enthusiastic, her experiments are not always successful. But you know what? That doesn't stop Marlow from trying again, and that's what's great about her. She doesn't give up, she just records her results, makes adjustments and has another go, even if her mum and dad aren't so keen. And you really can't blame Marlow's mum for being a bit cross when an experiment goes wrong and a perfectly delicious fruitcake ends up being covered in ants. Many readers will have someone in their lives that let them get away with a little bit more than mums and dads might do. Maybe an auntie or an uncle who let you stay up later than you should when they babysit, or a grandparent who gives you 2 pieces of cake instead of just 1. Well, Marlow has an uncle, Uncle Quentin. While Marlow's parents are trying to get her to tone down her experiments, Uncle Quentin shares her imagination and curiosity, and he encourages her to keep going, keep asking questions, keep trying to figure things out. So I know people like to label books, and that can be helpful, but to say that this is a book about science may put readers off who might not really like science, and I think it's much more than that. So I will say that this book is a perfect read for someone who wants a funny book, that likes stories about families and strong, interesting characters. You don't have to love science to read this book, but I bet you will want to try out the experiment at the back of the book after you read it.
Tracey's tip.
I've talked before on this podcast about the importance of students self-selecting their own reading material and the intrinsic motivation to read that goes hand in hand with that. In fact, reading expert Nancy Atwell says it's the only surefire way to induce a love of books. Nancy talks about reading being a personal art, and that personal preference is the foundation of that, saying that choice books should be a young reader's right, not a privilege granted by a kind teacher. And it's to that point that really got me thinking about what Kesta said. What happens when you're stuck as a reader? Or like in Kesta's case, what helped you find your groove as a reader? Aside from our treasured librarians, Kesta talked about the important role that teachers play. Nancy Atwell's work really speaks to me in this regard, and in her book, The Reading Zone, Nancy says that it's our job as teachers to help children to choose books, develop and refine their literary criteria, and carve out identities for themselves as readers. She says it's essential that every child we teach be able to say, these are my favourite authors, genres, books and characters this year, and this is why. So, to be that teacher for our students, Nancy says that we need to read all of the books we hope our students will, so we can make knowledgeable recommendations, offer help when readers get stuck, and teach children one at a time about books and reading in the daily quiet conversations of our library and classroom reading lessons. As teachers, it's overwhelming to think about reading the vast number of books our students are interested in, and it's my hope that podcasts like this one will help you in your efforts to understand more about your students as readers, as well as their book choices. But Nancy goes on to say that every day well-meaning teachers erect instructional roadblocks between their students and the pure pleasure of the personal art. Sometimes we act as gatekeepers towards students' book choices, confining kids to just right books or looking cynically at funny, edgy or forbidden topics. Learning the personal art of embracing books and reading can be derailed if individual choice is not honoured and book wardens get in the way. And to Kesta's point about the important role teachers play in helping students find their groove as readers, I guess the most appropriate way to finish my tip is the same way this podcast starts, echoing the wise words of Nancy Atwell, that for students of every ability and background, it's the simple miraculous act of reading a good book that turns them into readers, because even for the least experienced, most reluctant reader, it's the one good book that changes everything. The job of adults who care about reading is to move heaven and earth to put that book into a child's hands. And that's the challenge and privilege that we all have as teachers. I hope you enjoyed this episode with our reader in residence, Kesta Fleming. To keep up to date with all our episodes, make sure you subscribe to your preferred platform on the Ozcast network or visit my website LiTracey.com, where you'll find events and resources to empower young readers.
Writers Read by LiTracey. Getting that book in children's hands. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Writers Read by LiTracey, a Dave and the Beanstalk production.